Most people remember Chrono Trigger through its larger figures. The cursed knight, the revenge-driven magician, the robot staring into the end of history, the prehistoric warrior suplexing reptiles into extinction. And somewhere inside all of that is Marle. Usually, she's remembered as the healer, the princess, the character with haste, or occasionally the reason the timeline briefly stops functioning. Which is fitting, honestly, because Marle spends the entire game trapped between being emotionally central and psychologically overlooked by the player, by the story, and sometimes even by history itself. And what makes her interesting is that the game never really tries to correct this. It doesn't stop the adventure so everyone can acknowledge her hidden brilliance. There's no giant revelation where she suddenly becomes the real emotional core of the narrative. She remains impulsive, occasionally naive, and strangely unprepared for almost everything that happens. But Marle keeps moving anyway. There's no dramatic rebellion speech, there's no manifesto against the monarchy. She just sneaks out to the fair because castle life feels emotionally suffocating. And immediately, the game punishes her for it with a cosmic administrative horror. She goes back in time, interrupts her own ancestry, and starts disappearing from existence because history suddenly cannot verify her paperwork anymore. Which is one of the funniest existential crises in RPG history. The universe doesn't treat her like a tragic heroine. It treats her like a broken family document. Lineage disrupted, princess removed, please restore continuity. And from that point onward, Marle's entire character becomes this strange contradiction. She desperately wants to live horizontally, as an ordinary person among other people, while reality continuously drags her back into a vertical historical responsibility. She wants friendship, she wants adventure, movement, spontaneity. History only wants her to remain archivally valid. Even her freedom depends on the thing she's trying to escape. She wants to disappear into the crowd because she's royalty. People rush to protect her because she's royalty. Entire timelines destabilize because she's royalty. Her rebellion is funded by inheritance, and the game quietly keeps reinforcing this without ever turning it into a giant dramatic thesis statement. That's what makes Marle work so well. Chrono Trigger rarely explains emotional conditions directly. It shows people acting around them. Marle acts like someone constantly trying to outrun symbolic weight before it settles onto her shoulders permanently. Every scene with her has this slight runaway energy, like she made an impulsive emotional decision 5 seconds earlier and is only now discovering the consequences in real time. She drags Chrono into the fair. She rushes into situations emotionally first. She reacts before she processes. And importantly, the game never fully punishes her personality for this. It punishes specific mistakes, but not openness itself. The distinction is important because a lot of the stories eventually correct characters like Marle. They become hardened by responsibility. They become more strategic, more emotionally restrained. Marle never fully transforms into that person. Even after witnessing dead civilizations, apocalyptic futures, and enough temporal instability to qualify for universal probation, she still reacts to the world with emotional immediacy. Not because she's ignorant, but because she refuses to calcify. And that trait becomes much more noticeable when you compare her to the rest of the party. Frog is almost immobilized by guilt. Magus converts his entire existence into vengeance. Luca lives partially inside retrospection. Robo constantly searches for purpose through utility. Even Chrono somehow carries himself like a teenager, already halfway transformed into folklore. She's emotionally available, she's excitable, she's impulsive enough to accidentally destabilize causality before lunch. And because she lacks the heavier symbolic framing of the other characters, players tend to underrate her. Mechanically as well, She occupies one of the strangest positions in the party because she's useful without ever feeling dramatically defined. Robo gets the absurd sustain, Frog gets flexibility and combat utility, Isla somehow heals for almost no cost while beating prehistoric wildlife into another geological era. Luca melts encounters outright. Marle becomes... oh yeah, she has haste. Which is funny because haste accidentally describes her entire narrative role. She accelerates people. Not through authority, not through strategy, but through emotional momentum. She keeps scenes from becoming emotionally stagnant. Without her, the party risks turning into an unbelievably depressing collection of damaged archetypes wandering through geological tragedy. Think about this group for a second without Marle. There's the guilt-ridden knight, the grief-driven inventor, the robot confronting extinction, the revenge-obsessed sorcerer, and the silent protagonists whose hobbies include dying for symbolism. That's not an adventuring party, that's a therapeutic emergency. Marle keeps puncturing the emotional heaviness before it fully seals shut. By being emotionally complete, her role is to keep forcing life back into the story. She treats people as people before she treats them as symbols. And this becomes especially important in a time travel narrative because time travel stories naturally encourage emotional detachment. Characters start thinking like historians, managers, timeline accountants. People become abstract very quickly when you can observe the collapse of centuries via map transitions. Marle resists that instinct almost automatically. She encounters history with her emotions first, and sometimes that emotion is recklessness, especially with her father. The conflict with King Guardia is one of the few times the game directly slows down around her emotional life, and even then the argument feels painfully ordinary compared to everything else happening in the story. No cosmic revelation, no grand betrayal, just distance, miscommunication, expectation, and the suffocating feeling of being loved institutionally instead of personally. And what's interesting is that Marle never fully resolves this conflict through ideological rejection. She doesn't become anti-monarchy. She doesn't renounce her bloodline and disappear into freedom. But she also never comfortably settles into royal identity. She exists in permanent negotiation with it. That's why her character feels unusually human compared to the traditional fantasy princess arcs. Most stories force a clean decision, reject inheritance completely, or embrace destiny with orchestral confidence. Marle mostly improvises around the burden day by day, sometimes successfully, sometimes disastrously, usually while sprinting towards another problem that she hasn't thought through yet, and the game quietly respects her for this, not by glorifying her, but by allowing her inconsistency to remain intact. She's not transformed into wisdom. She just becomes slightly better at carrying responsibility without allowing it to fully flatten her emotional response. Which is much harder than becoming stoic, honestly, especially because the world of Chrono Trigger gives every character a reason to emotionally retreat. History ends repeatedly. Civilizations disappear casually. Entire species collapse between dungeons. The easiest thing in the world would be to become emotionally distant from it all. Marle never quite does. And because she lacks dramatic suffering aesthetics, it's easy to mistake this for shallowness. Her character depth isn't performative or vibes-based the way other characters are. There's no extended philosophical monologues, no theatrical loneliness, no tragic mystique. She just keeps trying to stay emotionally alive inside a story constantly flirting with extinction. Inside a world that has proven multiple times that she, specifically, is only there by its whim. Which also explains why she's so easy to overlook mechanically. Players tend to remember characters through visible dominance, huge damage, huge lore, huge emotional spectacle. Marle's contributions are often preventative rather than spectacular. She stabilizes the story's pacing. She keeps its momentum alive. She makes interactions feel socially breathable. She's the person you only notice when she's gone. The game officially begins when Marle disappears from the Millennial Fair. The story stops again when she's found in the Dark Ages, only to pick back up when she's casually ripped apart by causality in front of you. The player's relationship with Marle almost mirrors her place within the game, important enough that reality breaks without her, casually overlooked the moment she returns. And honestly, there's something weirdly beautiful about that, because Marle never demands recognition from the narrative. She never stops the story to insist on her own significance. She just keeps participating, keeps reacting, keeps caring, keeps moving, even while history repeatedly informs her that she is less an individual than a continuation mechanism for a royal bloodline. There's one especially fascinating conflict running underneath all of this. Marle acts like someone trying to become a person faster than the world can turn her into a symbol. She never fully wins that fight, but she never fully loses it either. By the end of the game, she's still impulsive. She's still emotionally immediate. She's still carrying that same sense of movement that she had at the fair. The difference is that she no longer treats responsibility as something that she can simply outrun. Not because she was defeated into maturity, but because she slowly learned that participation and obligation are not the same thing. She can remain herself while still being connected to history, messy, imperfect, without turning into an icon. And maybe that's why she feels strangely real compared to more dramatically celebrated RPG characters. A lot of heroes become memorable because they transcend ordinary emotional behavior. Marle becomes memorable once you notice that she never really does. She's still frightened, she's still reactive, she's still hopeful in ways that probably should have stopped being sustainable several apocalypses ago. But she keeps choosing engagement over withdrawal, even when the universe literally erased her once as a warning label. Especially then. I hope you enjoyed this video. As I was writing this script, I noticed something I hadn't thought of before. All of the characters in Chrono Trigger are exemplars of endurance, enduring through attitude, through intelligence, through technology, through honor, through strength, and through dedication. Marle, though, she endures through love. Love for Chrono, love for her friends, her family, and love for all of humanity. And with that, I might not know you, but I love you. Take care.